Hello, Ivy podcast listeners. Thank you for tuning into today's second episode on the female empowerment series that we're doing. I'm your host, Angela Alberti. Thank you so much for tuning in wherever you're tuning in from around the world. We appreciate you guys spending some time and sitting down with us. I have the pleasure and honor to interview some very powerful women within this unique industry that I am affiliated with staffing and recruiting. And today is truly a testimony of that. Kelly Boykin, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. I am honored to be here, especially with this topic. So my name is Kelly Boykin. I am with Real Staffing, which is the life sciences division of SThree. And again, really just excited to be here talking about some of these really, really exciting things.
Oh, well, thank you, Kelly, for the overview. I'd love to have the audience, I've been in the industry. This is all I've known. This is what I've grown up in. So I've definitely have seen your name come across many, many times. And it's just fantastic to be able to sit down with you and speak through some of the things that, you're passionate about. But could you let the audience know a little bit more so about your career and the timeline of your background?
Sure. And it's always intimidating when people say they've heard of you because you have to ask yourself, oh no, why?
All good things, right?
Yeah, that could go a lot of ways. So I have been in staffing for about 25 years, which is horrifying even to say. And today is my birthday. And so this is a
Happy
wonderful way to
birthday.
celebrate. Yes,
There
thank
you
you.
go.
Wonderful way to celebrate. So in that time, this is my third staffing firm. So I spent about 10 years with a commercial staffing firm, about 16 years with a marketing and creative staffing firm. And as I said, I joined Real actually just this year at the beginning of the year to be the head of MSP there.
Oh, wonderful. So how has that transition been for you going now overseeing the head of an MSP channel?
So that part of my world is very similar to what I was doing in the past, although the team I'm managing is much larger. Learning this part of the industry has been really fun. It's been fun to be pushed out of my comfort zone and have to learn a lot about pharma and medical device and all of the life science things. So it's been a lot of fun. It's a great company.
So, that is a very interesting aspect. You're going into this new industry that you're servicing. Any best practices that you would give the audience out there when they're submerging themselves into perhaps a new niche, a new industry sector that has helped you, at least you're personally applying to your day in, day out life right now?
It's a great question, especially as I look to bring people in from other parts of the industry. It can sound intimidating, it can feel intimidating, but it isn't. This is staffing,
Yeah.
and so many elements of staffing are the same in any kind of staffing firm. So yes, you can wrap your arms around a different vertical and understanding how those roles work and whatnot, but don't be afraid. Don't be intimidated, because there are just so many great companies out there and new things to learn all the time. And I think if you're not learning and trying new things, you get very stale very quickly.
Oh, I 100% believe that. I think the saying is the day you stop learning is the day you stop living. And I hold that highly. I mean, just take it from your own example. You've been in this for 25 years and now you're in a new role, continually learning, continually expanding those horizons. So kudos to you. You know, the last 2 years, or what has been the last 2.5 years within the staffing world and the business world in general. I mean, I guess who are we kidding, right? It's really been a crazy whirlwind experience, and a lot of things that were headed towards that trajectory of the future of work are actually happening right now, right? So what are some of those ideas, those trends that really get you excited when it comes to the world of staffing and talent delivery in general?
There is so much happening.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk a little bit about technology, but probably from a different angle than a lot of people might, because if I were to go deep into technology, it would be very obvious very quickly that I'm not a technology expert. So I won't give that away too fast. But all companies in our industry have talked about going through a digital transformation. They've been talking in our industry about total talent management for quite a while now. Anytime you go to a conference, anytime you go to a webinar, that's what the conversation was. And I think so many companies, myself included, really felt like that in a lot of ways fell flat. It was a big promise, but I haven't seen any companies yet that have really been able to deliver on a total talent solution from start to end across the whole value chain. So What I think has been interesting, though, is that I think we've adapted and learned that there are many, many, many AI and machine learning solutions out there that actually might be a little bit more fit for purpose in what you're attempting to do. Small companies would look at total talent management and say, there's no way I'm going to be able to afford these expensive technologies. And large companies look at it and say, there's no way we're going to be able to pivot our whole organization and implement new technologies that quickly. But I think this right now where we are and maybe accepting that has allowed us to step back and say, what is the actual problem I'm looking to solve and what technology helps me do that? So is it around sourcing? Do you want a better assessment platform? Do you want to be able to communicate with your talent? All of those things now exist. And if you can go in with a program or a platform that integrates with your tech stack overall, now we have the ability for companies to really prioritize how they want to step into this and do it in a way that makes sense for them and not spend millions and millions of dollars for something that's terribly difficult to implement and may not work the way they thought it was going to anyway.
I love how, you're prefacing that by realizing, let's take a step back. Is total talent management the solution? Is that a realistic goal? Are we applying some of these innovative technologies at play, or even on a budgetary perspective? So I've had the chance to interview Brian Pena a couple of months ago, and that was one of the first things he said is total talent management. Is that even possible? Right. Yeah. So very exciting to hear that. Thank you for your feedback on that. When we had a chance to, have the pre-dialogue on what the podcast session was, I loved one of these questions that came up. And I want to go ahead and ask you when it comes to conceptualizing the MSP model, right? Your thoughts on the overall conceptualization of the MSP model, especially when we're looking at enterprise versus retail.
It's obviously a topic that I get very excited about since this is how I'm spending a lot of my time and energy. First things first, these are both very, very important parts of an organization. They're both critically necessary to creating that profitability, the high gross margin business that comes with retail, but also the volume and the scale that comes with enterprise business. And so I think if you're taking an either or approach, that's fine, but you might be missing out on either the growth or profitability that you're looking for. And I think the healthiest companies have a way of balancing both. If you're looking at enterprise, you're looking at Fortune 1000 companies, and by and large, you are going to be working with an MSP. You're going to be working with a VMS, or at least an internal contingent labor program that's highly structured. And so unless you're doing true SOW project work, you're going to have a hard time getting to scale in these enterprise organizations if you're looking to go around the MSP. So embracing that, understanding that client sponsors are much more sophisticated than they were in the past. They're higher up in the organization. The buy-in is greater. So, this is top secret information here. Nothing anybody ever thought of, but retail and enterprise are different, and you really need to think about them differently. The sales process for enterprise is very long. It's very complex. The contracts are annoyingly complex and frustrating. The order process, the submittal, getting a fill to happen, it's very, very different in those two kinds of business. And so you need to treat them differently. What I have seen most effective is where the teams are separated and where they can each focus and be held accountable for what they are there to do, whether that's retail or whether that's enterprise. And I'm very lucky to be with a company that sees that knows that values that. And it's something that we're really excited about working on right now. I think, again, stepping back and saying, what kind of business do we want to be? And if we really want to be in both, treat them differently. They are both very valuable, but they have to be handled differently, or you're just going to have a lot of frustrated recruiters and a lot of frustrated clients.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to me because you've been on both sides of the spectrum, the MSP, the staffing, the supplier side. What are your best practice recommendations for an MSP provider? Because let's be real, sometimes, at least on the supplier side, they haven't garnered the best reputation. So if you're looking to truly enhance your supplier program as an MSP, what would be some of those best practice approaches to take?
Yeah. So, there are 8,000 staffing firms out there, and it's not easy to be in supply chain and MSP and try to figure out who's cutting edge, who can offer something different without getting barraged by a large number of staffing firms. I think the critical thing is going to sound very, very elementary, but your suppliers are actually there to help you grow your business and vice versa, right? I think the days in the past where an MSP would be guarded, would be aggressive, would be really not embracing of a supplier, those are the least successful programs that we see, where an MSP can look at their supply chain and say, help us, teach us, what do you know? How are you doing this? And really embrace them as true partners, not one-sided vendor relationship. Those are the partnerships I think that grow the most. That's where suppliers are going to be the most invested. That's where they're going to want to put their best resources and their best talent. And they're going to really try to help solve problems for the customer, which is why we're all there. And so I think fairly common sense, be nice, be a good partner, but I think it goes deeper than that. And I think, as I said, when MSPs first came out, they were, many of them were just taking a very anti-supplier approach. And the more you embrace your suppliers and rely on them and treat them as a partner, the more success you're going to have.
Truly, it is a very fundamental aspect of it, but it's so true. It's a reciprocated relationship, and it's all with the same end goal. And if you see that in line, then you are going to be setting up the client, the suppliers, and the whole ecosystem successfully. Yeah. I praise you on that commentary 100%, because you see the programs and the variations of each, but it really is having that fundamental value core at the center of it. Now, this question admittedly is selfish here. And I love this because you're somebody that I've looked up to on a personal level, but I'm asking this question just as somebody that sits on a board and the only female in the room, right? Trying to bring up and start a company. What advice would you give women, or the women that are tuning into today's episode? Because after all, this is part of a very special female series that we're doing. What advice would you give those women that are listening in today?
Well, and I will start by very humbly saying I by no means have all of the answers to female leadership or the things that we should do. I think it's interesting when you look back and think about even 10, 15 years ago, female leaders, what we said to them. And the things that we said were mostly intended to defeminize them as leaders. It was a lot of male wording around be more assertive, be more directive, speak more loudly, don't speak so quietly, dress differently, manage differently, right? And I get it, that's kind of where we were, but I think my advice is don't do that. You don't need to do that, right? There are a lot of studies indicating that female-led organizations are the most profitable organizations. There are many, many reasons. There are some of the best female leaders that you see out there don't necessarily take that strong male approach to how they're leading. And so I think, we have a culture in America of self-help books. How do I get better at this? How do I minimize my weaknesses? And it's important that we think about that. But I think there's a very fine line between minimizing your weaknesses and really just playing to your strengths and knowing how to leverage those a little bit differently. If we're only focused on minimizing our weaknesses, that's really focusing on a negative. And my viewpoint is that strengths and weaknesses are very closely connected. They're not opposite things. They're not different from each other, but they are closely linked. And so if you think about, like, I have some examples. I am notorious for, and I think I hold the world record for having the worst sense of direction of any human on the planet. It's actually pretty horrifying. I can get lost in my own town, in my own neighborhood. People ask me directions and I'm like, you're talking to the wrong person. But it's not because I am stupid. It's because typically when I'm writing, I'm not paying attention. I'm solving another problem. I'm thinking about something else. I'm thinking about something creative. And so that is a weakness. But when I step back and said, all right, stop beating yourself up. What is it that you're doing? Well, you're actually taking that moment to solve a problem that you weren't able to solve during the day in a different fashion. So let's try to leverage that a little bit differently. I have an example in the book that I think we'll talk about later on. tend to be very fast paced. I tend to make decisions very, very quickly. That can sound like a really good thing. I make a reference in the book to when I went out to lunch many years ago, and over a 30-minute lunch, I got a Chick-fil-A and bought a car. And, turned out to be an okay decision, but not every decision that I make that quickly goes that well. I can certainly miss details. And I've learned as I've gotten older to surround myself with people that are much more detail oriented than I am, or that will catch some of those things and slow me down and make me think them through. The other end of the spectrum, I know this great guy who may or may not be in the next room, the most thorough person I know, very detail oriented, very thoughtful, almost never makes a mistake. So any decision that he makes is extremely thorough. However, if you try to go out to dinner and order a beer with him, this is a very lengthy process because we're looking at all of the data, all of the possible beer selections that you could face. And so
we're asking the waiter, what do you think about this? And getting feedback.
Exactly. So, my advice kind of closing this up is it's okay. Lead like a woman. Know what your strengths are, know what your weaknesses are, and surround yourself with people that are good at those things, but don't spend all your time trying to be something that you're not. Really understand who you are and how all of those qualities are going to help you be a rock star.
Wow, that is truly powerful. And I'm so excited. I'm taking a lot of that into my own account because I feel like whenever you were explaining yourself, you were just explaining Angela as well, like quick to make decisions, terrible with directions, has a spouse that is very pensive and data oriented. But I've also been that female leader at an organization that has questioned myself, questioned my strengths, taken a chance to dive deep into myself and ask myself, am I even supposed to be in this role? Am I even worthy of it as a leader when I have all of these very strong male counterparts? So it's truly powerful to hear that, because even through all of that, that's some amazing advice. But now we're seeing this trend that's happening in terms of leadership and being an empathetic leader, which I think is just more naturally a fit for a female, right? That leadership
Absolutely.
with empathy. So we see this kind of garnering some level of popularity as well. And it's maybe people figuring out the equation. So it's really something special to be a part of that movement. And I think this is a perfect segue into the next question that I'd love to ask you on. And I've got to say it's been talked about a lot, but what is your view on DE&I? And as popular as it is, I'd love to just hear your take on it and how that can be fundamental from an organization at the top level.
Yeah, it is also the topic of the week, month, year, and that is a good thing. We all know that big companies have been focused on this for a while with their permanent hiring. Diversity has been fundamental in talent acquisition there for a long time, but it's newer to the contingent labor world. And we largely were terrified that we were going to do something wrong and make a mistake. And so we stayed away from it for a long time. Fortunately, our clients are asking us and asking MSPs to help them diversify their workforce, which is a good thing. But there are some challenges that we need to be able to solve before we're really going to be able to make a difference with this. The first thing that I see is a lack of clarity on the goals. What are you actually trying to achieve? We're not ordering off a menu here. Like, if you want to diversify, that's great. What does that mean? What are you looking to do? Where are you now? Where are you trying to get to? Because again, often what we'll see is just bring us more diverse candidates. Well, that's great. Any diverse candidates? Are you trying to solve a particular problem? And so that is something that I think until we can do that, we're all sort of flinging mud against the wall. The other thing that is missing, and it's complicated, but we've got to be able to solve for it, is the lack of data and tracking and where the process is breaking down or where anybody might be failing. So are we looking at how many people we're submitting to how many you're interviewing? Is there a bias in selecting who you're going to interview? What about the folks that are being interviewed? Are they being hired at or the greater than the numbers of ratios? Or do you have bias built into your internal managers that are doing this hiring? And most importantly is, if you hire diverse candidates and they're coming into your organization, what's the turnover look like? How long are they staying? Because if there isn't immediate inclusion and belonging, they're going to leave. And all of that was a waste of time, right? And so my personal belief is that diversity is extremely important, but that inclusion is the most important thing that we can do. And it's the thing that I think companies really are and need to be focusing on doing.
Yeah, the hiring is great, but what is the retainment strategy thereafter? It's truly a critical part of it. The perfect segue then into my next question. This is a very competitive marketplace. I think the most recent studies that were published this past Friday, we're dealing with a 3.2 unemployment rate. We've completely bounced back after the pandemic. What do you think needs to be top of mind? Of course, in conjunction with what you stem from on DE&I, but for companies to start to think through, or at least really evolve themselves when it comes to attracting and retaining talent in this marketplace, particularly considering how candidate driven it is, considering generational impacts. We're dealing with millennials and Gen Zers who have an average tenure of like 2.5 years. So in conjunction with all of that, what are some of those top strategies right now in this market to attract and retain?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you mentioned the generational element. There are a lot of books and white papers written about this topic. Many will speak much more eloquently than me about the technologies and the strategies and the approaches to attracting and retaining. Inclusion, obviously, as you know, I feel very strongly about, but I think to your point, when we take that a little bit further and we say, what about the generations? Let's really look at that, because these are the people that are making up our workforce.
Yeah.
And when I even say that, I feel instantly old by saying generations, these young people these days. But when you look at baby boomers to Gen X, that was 25 plus years. And it was very easy to group and categorize those folks and understand their behaviors and their patterns. And managing them became very clear cut. You would certainly motivate and incent them differently, but that was clearer. The gap between Gen X and millennials was closer, and millennials to Gen Z is even closer.
Yeah.
And so it's almost overnight, it feels. And a lot of that stems from how they measure when technology was introduced, how quickly your kids had a cell phone or access to social media and those kinds of things. But it has fundamentally changed so many aspects of our culture, including how do you manage and motivate a 24-year-old. That is different from how you're going to manage and motivate somebody that's Gen X. And I think it's important. And the most successful organizations are going to be diverse. And if you look at all of these different generations, they all bring a different technology, a different thought process, diversity in how they're going to solve problems and experiences. And it's all important. And they should all be valued equally, but treated uniquely. You can't, as I say, you can't think about them all in one group and say, this is how we drive productivity, period. If you do that, that's fine. And it might be standardized, but it's probably not going to help you with one end of the spectrum of the other. So it's just one additional thought. There are so many things. This is probably a never ending topic of how to attract and retain. But I think, learning more about your population, what do you want it to look like? What does it look like now? And do you really know the best way to motivate them and to speak to them and get the best out of them?
Yeah. And I look back on many of the responses that you've given us today, and it really is just a matter of keeping it so much more simple than what it is. And it comes back to what are your goals? And, when we look at the MSP model, the MSP supplier relationship, what you've mentioned to us about, some of the things that line up to popular trends and technologies, but it really is at a core, what do you want it to look like as an enterprise buyer? So it's wonderful. It's a simple approach, but it is the best approach, I think. So somewhat of a philosophical question for you, if you will, but the future of work, what does that look like to you? What does the future of work embody, and what will it be in 5 years from now?
Oh my gosh, it's such a loaded topic.
I know.
I think before the pandemic, generally speaking, we thought people need to be in an office and that's how they're going to be the most productive. And that was our rule of thumb. And during the pandemic, we thought, oh, wow, we can do this. People are still productive and maybe we're saving a lot of money on rent. And very, very divided in terms of how organizations wanted to approach that. Hybrid was introduced as the great solution and the way of maybe navigating both. And it very well might be. But I think what's unique about it is that, dependent on your workforce, depending on the experience level, depending on the tenure of your workforce, you might have to think differently about how you perform back to work and the future of work that might be different from another organization. We are a company at Real that has a really, really great track record of college recruiting for our recruiters. We bring them in, we have amazing training, a solid onboarding process, best in class. We would love to clone the skills of our rock star recruiters. But when you have a hybrid model, the challenge, or when you have a remote model, the challenge is somebody who's just coming in from college, the way that they are going to learn is by sitting next to a rock star and listening to them and learning from them and, observing them. And so it's not a simple solution. We talk to folks out there who are hiring that say, if you mandate an employee has to be in 100% of the time, you're not going to attract the right talent because people don't want to be in the office. And that's fair. That there are a lot of people that feel that way. We also have candidates that say, I don't want to be sitting in my apartment in New York all day long. I want to be able to go in and socialize and learn from others, and so I don't think there is a right or a wrong answer. I think there isn't a win for organizations. I think we have to sort of navigate this as we go. For me personally, I have been in a situation for many years that I have been remote or hybrid, and my teams have been located elsewhere. And so, I have had the benefit of being able to use technologies like this to try to build relationships. But somebody that is a new manager or new in the workforce, it's tricky. So that was a non-answer.
No, that was wonderful. And
well,
and I think it's so true. It really is kind of navigating through these waters and these times. A big part of that, in my opinion, is knowing where your people work. Where are your people coming from? I'm sitting in Houston right now, and it takes me 90 minutes to get 10 miles in the morning. So sitting from home, I save 90 minutes, 3 hours a day. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate that as from the lens of a worker. But then you go back to your contrast on the New York, maybe sitting in their apartment, they need that social. So it really depends. That's in my mind, a big area to look at it from, and super fundamental to what we look at in terms of the future of work. And now I want to kind of take it back to a couple of months ago at SIA's Executive Forum Conference. And I was sitting in a room, and there was all these powerful women that were presenting, and I was probably blubbering away with tears rolling down my face because we were going through this book, Together We Rise. So I'd love to just kind of get your feedback, what this experience was like for you, and a little bit more about, a collection of your story and what you brought to the table when it came to being a part of this really awesome book.
It's obviously a fun topic for me to talk about. And for those who may not know or may not have picked it up yet, it was really interesting the way it happened. Most of us did not know each other. Most of us had never met in person, if we did know each other. And we were all going to celebrate one of our co-authors, Joyce Russell, who was launching a book at conference a few years ago, and it got canceled due to COVID. So we stepped back and said, well, we still want to do this. How can we pull everyone together and hear more about Joyce's experience in Joyce's book? And so that was sort of the beginning of the book club. And we had female authors come in. We did yoga sometimes. We had facials. We did a variety of things together, as everyone did, trying to get through the pandemic. But one of our speakers was a woman who wrote a book about writing a book. And when we finished that process with her, she said, you guys should write a book. And we all went, what possibly could we say that anybody would want to read or listen to? And I think, you spoke earlier about imposter syndrome. It's amazing sitting in a room with these other women, CEOs, COOs, and entrepreneurs, and the imposter syndrome was rampant. And it still actually is for a lot of us too, because it's been a very surreal experience. It's been exciting and it's been phenomenal as it's happened. We're donating all the proceeds. So first of all, I always feel like I need to lead with that, because this is not a profit-making thing for us. Yeah. We truly want to be able to use any proceeds and rise women up in our industry. And so that makes it fun, and it makes it a lot easier to kind of talk about and feel good about promoting it. It doesn't feel self-promoting, which, as we know, women aren't always as good at the self-promotion piece of it as others. But the interest in it has been pretty amazing. I am one of the folks who thought, there are 15 of us, we're going to sell 15 copies of this book, maybe 16 if you're going to buy one for your mom, but that's going to be the extent of it. And I think we've all been shocked at how many people are interested in it. And when you look at, I mean, many of us are speaking on panels, either all together or in smaller groups. What we talk about in the book, really none of it is rocket science. None of it is, kind of to your point earlier, it's basic. It's bringing things to a very simple conversation, but the stories are real. And so I think when you hear someone who, again, is a CEO or an entrepreneur, and they're talking about their struggle with confidence when they were younger, or their imposter syndrome, or them trying to really solidify what their strengths were in the world, and you're reading that, it's real. It speaks to people because you're looking at them saying they got to this point in life, but they're thinking some of the same things that I'm thinking right now. That's very inspiring. And so I think that's been the interesting part about it, is how it has resonated, either one of the stories or all of the stories with different people. And I think it's because it is real. And it's down to earth, but it approaches people where they are and lets them see that everybody has their own path to walk and their own things that they're struggling with.
Yeah. There's certainly this level of attraction that you get when you see others' vulnerabilities, right? Because you put yourself in that position and you say, wow, I'm not alone in this fight. Finding out who I am as a professional, as a working mother, as somebody trying to keep it all together. It's really refreshing to see that. Can you walk us through what your story was and what your input was through this book?
Yeah. There were a couple themes. I think one to mention is there are people around you right now that can give you what you need and that can help you. I think oftentimes we look for a savior, a mentor, a formalized relationship where somebody can get you to that next level. But I was able to learn early on that I could learn from everybody around me. And if I was a sponge and I made sure that my ego was in check and I just was in learning mode, that really helped a lot. And a lot of the people that helped me throughout my career were in unexpected ways. They were contributing to my success without ever knowing it. I think the majority of what I talk about, and I hinted to this earlier, is really that concept of superpowers and what your strengths and weaknesses are. And being very, vulnerable in that book of, I could tell you, and I could at a very young age, all of the things that I would have listed as weaknesses. Yeah, I'm this or that. Those are some good qualities. I might be good at a couple things, but those I'm not going to be very good at telling you about, but I could tell you my flaws instantaneously. And I still could. And somewhere along the way, and when you focus on that, by the way, that hurts your confidence because, comparison is the thief of joy, I think is the way that saying goes. When you focus on your weaknesses, you feel like I'm never going to really be able to get where I want to get. And then when you do have success, it feels like imposter syndrome. But when you look at those things and you say, as I mentioned earlier, there's a flip side to this. This isn't a weakness. This is a trait. This is a trait of who I am. And so how do I think about this trait in a way that actually is a strength, not suppressing that trait, not overcoming that trait, but how do I think about this differently so that this is truly something that makes me better and makes me stronger? So that's the fundamental theme, I guess, of what I talk about in a brief chapter. So we all kind of put some ideas in there pretty quickly. There could be a book 2 out there somewhere.
Oh, fantastic.
That we talk about, that we go in a little bit deeper.
Yeah. A lot of what you say is themed around the controlling of your thoughts and where we choose to invest our time and our thoughts into. And I think that's a very real topic that a lot of women can relate to because there's a lot of things that happen between these years here. Where can we actually order the book?
So it is on Amazon. That is the best way. That's the fastest way. And interestingly, there's more than one book called Together We Rise. The other one looks like it's a little bit more of a series, Harlequin romance type series. I have no idea. It looks lovely also, but on Amazon is the best way to find it.
Okay, Together We Rise as part of the Lady Leaders Book Club. I've had a chance to read. I'm going to read round 2, I think, at some point during the summer when I'm on a vacation on a beach. At least that's what I tell myself mentally at this point in time. But Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell the audience a little bit about where we can find you or get in contact with you?
LinkedIn is always a great way for folks to get in contact with anybody, and I'm good at accepting pretty much anybody who wants to connect on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. Again, I'm with Real Staffing as well, and so you can find me there. And also, but I would say LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect with me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I really want to thank you for sitting with us today. And I know that just like myself, there's going to be a lot of women and people that are tuning in and walk away with something truly valuable from today's session. And thank you to our listeners as well. Time is honestly the best gift that we can give one another. So I appreciate you, Kelly, and our audience as well for spending some time with us today on the Ivy Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a huge honor, and I'm excited to hear all the rest of the women in your series.
Awesome, awesome. All right, we will see you guys on the next episode.